Hello, and you are listening to Eco Justice Radio on KPFK Los Angeles and KPFT Houston, a project of SoCal 350 Climate Action. Our show presents environmental and climate stories from a social justice frame featuring voices not necessarily heard on mainstream media. Eco Justice Radio acknowledges that we record the show on the traditional territory of the Tongva and all of their relatives. Welcome, I am Jessica Aldridge. On today's show, Indigenous Peoples of Mexico unite against corporate mega projects. I will be interviewing Victorino Torres Nava, professor of Nahuatl language at the Anahuac Academy. Also joining us and providing translation is Marcos Aguilar, Masahuali Mexicano, co-founder and executive director of Semillas Sociedad Civil Anahuac International University Preparatory of North America and of the American Indian Resurgence Initiative, formerly Los Angeles Collective Coordinator for the National Commission for Democracy in Mexico. Marcos most recently became a community-nominated commissioner to the National Forum of Mexico on constitutional reform for the rights of indigenous peoples and Afro-Mexicans, held in Mexico City in August 2019 to 2021. On today's show, we discuss how Indigenous peoples of Mexico are participating in the Caravan for Water and Life to bring awareness to environmental and social rights struggles they are experiencing. Indigenous social justice and environmental groups have come together to speak out against destructive megaprojects and mining across 8 states in central and southern Mexico. The Caravan has been traveling from town to town, making visible the local and regional struggles for clean water and the defense of territories. The Caravan began on International Water Day, March 22nd in the state of Puebla, and will arrive in the state of Morelos, south of Mexico City, at the end of April. The Caravan has called for a time of rebellious dignity, to build a new nation by and for all to strengthen the power of the people. The mega projects include privatization of water wells and the aquifers, construction of highways and rail lines, oil and gas pipelines, and massive rare earth mineral mining projects that will have irreversible impact on human health, indigenous cultures and autonomy, and ecosystems across the region. Thank you for tuning into Eco Justice Radio and our show, Indigenous Peoples of Mexico Unite Against Corporate Mega Projects. I am your host, Jessica Aldridge, and it's my honor to welcome our guest, Victorino Torres Nava, professor of Nahuatl language at Anahuac Academy, and Marcos Aguilar, head of the school of Anahuac Academy and executive director of Semillas de Pueblo. Welcome to Eco Justice Radio.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Igual les damos un saludo a todos los que nos están escuchando en Nahuatl.
We also welcome everybody in Nahuatl, to everybody listening.
Thank you. It's nice to have you both on the show. Victorino, you're calling from Pantepec community of Morelos, and Marcos, you're joining us from Los Angeles. You will be assisting with translation as well as joining in on the conversation. So let's get started here. Victorino, you are representing a group of Indigenous peoples of Mexico that are traveling throughout the country of Mexico and calling out corporate mega projects that have or will result in the stealing of land and water rights and human health impacts. What is the reason for the Caravan of Water and Life, and why are Indigenous people marching?
Realmente no sé si considerarme como
Well, first I'd like to clarify that maybe I wouldn't consider myself necessarily a representative, because I believe that all Indigenous peoples and community members are equally representatives of their communities and of each of their communities. But perhaps the elders in our communities are our true representatives. They're the ones that are the caretakers and have most looked out for the mountains and the springs, and they're the ones that have had to withstand the impacts of multinational corporations in different pueblos coming and taking resources and disturbing the natural environment.
Sí, una de las principales bases es recalcar visibilizar las leyes que nos protegen a nosotros como pueblos, como comunidades originarios, nativos, desde antes de la llegada de los españoles, ¿no? Que muchas veces se invisibiliza, y por eso es que muchas veces personas, empresas, se aprovechan del desconocimiento de las comunidades, de las leyes que protegen a los pueblos, ¿no? A su lengua, a su cultura y a sus territorios. Entonces, una de las principales
First of all, the Caravan for Water and Life is calling attention to the importance of respecting existing laws that protect water and life in indigenous communities that predate the invasion by the Spaniards of these territories. And those laws also predate the invasion of the territories by the Spaniards and the Mexican government. And it's important in this caravan to uplift that history and that continued presence of the laws, the natural laws that protect our pueblos, that protect our relatives and our relations in the natural environment. And this caravan is calling attention to those, the need to respect those laws.
Y es importante también recalcar que ahorita sí, como el problema que más.
And even though today we're calling attention to the problem that multinationals bring in their construction projects, in their mining projects, extractive projects, but we're also calling attention and mindful of companies that are owned in Mexico that are also exploitative of indigenous communities and territories in particular, where large construction projects take place, and those both displace and extract from indigenous communities and territories.
Sí, y también, pues, obviamente, proyectos que es por parte de los gobiernos, ¿no? Como es el caso del Tren Maya. Pero también tenemos problemas.
A third impact that we're concerned and that we raise attention to is the impact of government-funded projects, such as the Tren Maya that is being proposed and developed. But in our community, even though the crisis isn't at a spike right now, but there is a very serious concern about the impact of freeway or of a major road that is going to be constructed near our pueblo. And the government pitches it as if it's a development project for our communities, but in reality, there are no plans to benefit our communities. In reality, it's only an extractive impact on our communities that is destructive.
How are people participating in the caravan? Is this people on foot? Is it cars? Is it both?
The caravan is mostly on foot. However, there are cars that are supporting the caravan, but for the principal mode of transportation is on foot.
And how many people are part of the caravan?
There isn't really an exact number of participants in the caravan. It may vary as we go by from pueblo to pueblo, but in reality, the intention is to be able to call attention to each pueblo. And so, although it may vary, the participants will continue to maintain awareness and attention of the caravan. It's going through approximately 6 states in the country of Mexico, and so those participants may vary in each state with attention to each one of the crisis points that is being brought to awareness by the caravan.
And that brings up a good point. It's like, what is so important about the different states that it's going through? And in addition to that, many of our listeners have probably not been in these areas of Mexico. So it might be a great opportunity to paint or describe the topography. So, where is it traveling through? Why is that important? And what does that look like in those areas?
So the caravan starts in the territories in Puebla, where a crisis has come of the extraction of water from traditional sources of water there by a company named Bonafon that is owned by Danone. And this French multinational, probably with some ownership in the United States as well, is extracting water from that territory, and that starts in Puebla. It looks like it's a Spanish corporation, perhaps. And it's mostly involved with like dairy type products like yogurt, but it's also extracting water.
Ajá, y sí,
So in
entonces,
Puebla, the problem is
en ese
that
lugar,
water is being
bueno, más
extracted
bien en la
to
mayoría
sell
de
the
los
water,
lugares donde están como esos
to take in
proyectos hay
from
agua.
natural springs
Hay
and rivers
ríos,
and other natural
ajá,
sources of
hay
water,
ríos
and that becomes a problem there.
y
But
sí
here in our
cambia como
pueblo, the problem
como las
is that an
características,
open
¿no? En
pit
algunos
mine is
lugares hay
being
selva, en otros
proposed,
lugares hay
and
bosques,
the water
en
will be
otros
used
lugares
to
hay
actually
ríos,
as a
en
part
otros
of the
lugares hay
mining process.
manantiales,
And so
como
instead
es
of
el
being
caso
able
de
to
aquí de
drink the
la
water,
comunidad de Puente Tec.
the company
Quieren hacer el
that is
proyecto
proposing to
minero
mine in our
a cielo
territories
abierto,
is going to be using the water to
pero lo que
basically
ellos
destroy the earth.
What do these areas look like? How many states is it going through again? And then paint us a picture. What do these areas look like?
Sí, en cada estado es muy diferente, no
So each state is very unique. So some of the
sí, porque
territories are
como
forests and
comenté
some of the
hace rato,
territories are like
algunos son bosques,
rainforests, like almost like
algunos son
jungles.
selvas, otros son
But for example, where my pueblo is,
semiáridos, como por ejemplo
it's
aquí
a
en
semi-arid
Fuentebolia se llama
rainforest. So
selva
when it
baja
rains,
caducifolia,
everything is green.
significa
It's like
que
a jungle. But when it doesn't
la
rain
mitad
in the
del año
non-raining
llueve
season,
mucho y
then
la
everything
otra
is
mitad
dry
del
like a
año no
desert.
llueve. Y es importante también señalar que en este lugar, por ejemplo, en Morelos, estamos llenos de barrancas, de ríos, muchos ríos, muchos ríos. Históricamente ha sido un lugar de mucha agua y todavía hay muchos balnearios en el estado donde el agua nace del suelo, pero
So in our territory,
actualmente por el
there
problema
are
de, como
deep
mencionaba hace rato, de
canyons
las
and
constructoras,
many
están
rivers in the state of Morelos, many
adueñándose de los
rivers.
pozos, de
And
los
these deep
manantiales.
canyons,
Y aparte
collect the
de eso,
water.
todo
But
agua
previously we were able to
la
drink the water
suciedad
from
del
the
agua
rivers, and
están
there's
echando a los
still
ríos.
like
Entonces ya
natural
no hay
springs and
ningún río
wells
limpio, todos existen
that can be
ríos,
found throughout
pero
the
ya no hay
state, many
ríos
of them.
limpios. El único
But
río
the water is mostly
que
not potable
podría yo
anymore
decir que
because of the
todavía es
damages
limpio
being
y que
caused by
podrías
pollution
tomar
from
del
extractive
río,
industries in our state.
nosotros
So
tomábamos
if
antes
anything, there may
del
only
agua
be
del
one
río
river that we're able
y
to drink water from.
actualmente
But we
solamente en
cannot,
algunas
in our
partes sí
pueblo,
podemos
drink
tomar,
water from the river that we have
porque
right
ya
at the base of
toda la
our
suciedad lo
canyon.
están echando
And
a los ríos.
this
Entonces
has
teníamos
become
mucha
a
agua y
problem that
actualmente sí hay
while
agua
there's still
todavía,
so
pero
much
el agua
water,
está
it's all been
contaminada.
become contaminated.
Sí, y todavía actualmente mucha gente, principalmente niños, bajan
Another
a
problem is
nadar a
that
los ríos porque
even
pues
though
es
the rivers
nuestra
are
fuente
contaminated,
también de,
children
como
still go and
de
play in the
vida.
rivers. They go play in the
Entonces,
water because that's just our
imagínense
natural way of
que
being.
pues yo esté
And so can
nadando
you
en un
imagine that
río
these
donde una
extractive
empresa
industries
como es una
are
empresa minera
depositing
pueda
the
tirar todos sus
chemicals that they
desechos
use for the
químicos de
extraction
cianuro y
into the
todos los
water
químicos que
streams and into
utilizan
the
para
water
extraer los
that the
metales?
children are
O
playing
sea,
in? And can you
pues
imagine
la
the impacts, the
gente
health
no
impacts that
podría
they're
estar en esos
experiencing
lugares.
because of that?
Sí, y también en el
And
caso, por
so
ejemplo, de
another
los
problem we
animales,
have
aquí
is that
una cosa que
in the
tenemos
time
es que
in the
en
rainy season,
temporada de
and there's two
lluvias,
main seasons, the
nosotros
dry and the
encierramos
rain
los
season. So in
animales,
the
puede
rainy
ser las
season,
vacas,
we corral our
pollos,
animals. We keep them
cerdos,
under a corral
aves,
because
todo
and
tipo
all kinds of
de
animals,
animales que
the
tengamos, los encerramos en
cows
temporada de lluvias
and
porque nosotros tenemos que
horses
sembrar.
and bulls
Entonces,
and birds
tenemos que
and any
cuidar de
kind of
su
animals that
comportamiento.
we're raising.
Pero
We
en
corral
temporada de
them in
secas,
order to
cuando no
keep them safe,
llueve,
but also
soltamos
because
los
we have to
animales.
plant during the rainy season.
Entonces los animales andan
Then
sueltos en
once
los
the rainy
campos.
season passes,
Entonces
then
el
we let the
problema también
animals
que hay es
loose
que
so
son
that they
pocos
can
los
go and drink the
animales
water and feed in the
domésticos
natural
y
territory.
silvestres,
And so then they
pues
become
beberían
contaminated
agua
also.
contaminada.
It seems pretty significant that the Caravan would start on International Water Day, March 22nd. And as you said, began in the town of the state of Puebla, where the Bonafont Company has been exploiting the aquifers in that region. What do you have to share in regards to the day that it started, the International Water Day, and why that was so significant?
Sí, pues justo surge el 22 de marzo y parte de este municipio que mencioné que se llama Juan Bonilla, en Puebla, porque desafortunadamente actualmente la mayoría de las sociedades estamos
The caravan
acostumbrados a
begins
comprar
in
agua,
Puebla
cuando
on
históricamente nosotros
International
nunca
Water
habíamos
Day,
comprado agua. En
precisely
las
because of
comunidades
the
nosotros
impacts
todavía
of
bebemos agua
the
de
Bonafont's
las
company's
llaves,
extraction of the
porque
waters from the municipal
de
district of
eso,
Juan
de
Bonilla
eso y no
in
nos
the
hemos
state of
muerto.
Puebla. this water, presents a problem to society because the society in general is being taught to want to drink purified water from a bottle as if that was somehow better. But ancestrally, we never drank water from a bottle. We never purchased water. It was something that was also always naturally available and naturally looked for and therefore naturally taken by community as needed. Now people are being convinced that drinking water from a bottle and buying water is a better option. And this is part of the problem because Bonafont is extracting the water, bottling it, and selling it. And the problem is they're selling it to the people themselves from the community, but mostly they're selling the water in the cities and turning that into a for-profit, venture. But this isn't the way that we had access to water ancestrally, and then therefore that leaves the community without water because that water is being tapped and taken from the community, and therefore we no longer have access to the water in the community itself.
The privatization of the water and the privatization of the land that is happening by these mega corporations, what is the role of the government? Is the government being complicit?
In order for a private corporation to extract water or any resources, they need to have permission from the government to enter into that territory. None of it can be done without legal permission and sanctioned by the government. So this is how the government becomes complicit in the extractive industries, is that it permits for that extraction to take place in any territory in the Republic.
Thank you. We're going to take a break real quick and be right back. Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying Eco Justice Radio. We air every Monday at 9 a.m. on KPFT Houston and every Wednesday at 3 p.m. on KPFK Los Angeles. Stay connected by subscribing to Eco Justice Radio on all major podcast apps and visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, to check out previous shows and guests and get connected with us on social media. For an extended version of this interview as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon. Today you are listening to Indigenous Peoples of Mexico Unite Against Corporate Mega Projects with host Jessica Aldridge, myself, and guest Victorino Torres Nava, professor of the Nahuatl language at the Anahualcomequec Academy, and Marcos Aguilar, head of the School of Anahualcomequec Academy and executive director of Semillas de Pueblo.
Nos unimos con todos pueblos, como granos unidos en mazorca. Hoy nos unimos con todos los pueblos para luchar, luchar y luchar y defender a nuestra madre tierra, para luchar y luchar y luchar y preservar a nuestra madre tierra.
Victorino, on January 30th, the Indigenous and Popular Council Emiliano Zapata, located in the state of Guerrero near Acapulco, was attacked by a paramilitary organization. Why would the indigenous groups be attacked by drug traffickers, and what are these groups requesting from the state and federal government in order to protect their caravan?
Muy buena pregunta.
That's a very good question. One of the conditions that we're facing in Mexico and really throughout Latin America is that paramilitary groups are being used to suppress indigenous movements, especially on behalf of extractivist international corporations. So many times activists are assassinated for opposing the extractive industry's interests. And these paramilitary actions are often are even carried out by groups associated with narco trafficking. And this way, the corporations and the government can wipe their hands clean of the violence, claiming that it's these other groups that have caused it. So this is part of our reality, that this complicity between the state and criminal organizations continues to persist and seems to always continue.
And is this threat of potential violence not only from, the potential of drug traffickers, but is there a threat of violence to the caravan and the participants, and why so?
siempre es una amenaza, ¿no? Al menos aquí en México, cualquier lucha social es sinónimo de riesgo. Incluso existe una criminalización por los que o más bien quienes se oponen a los proyectos extractivistas, quien levanta la voz
yeah,
para
this is a
visibilizar actos de
persistent threat.
corrupción,
There's always a
despojo,
threat in
crimen
Mexico
organizado,
of
feminicidios,
of
etcétera,
anybody taking
etcétera.
action
Son
to defend the
personas
environment or
que saben
defend
que
ourselves
ponen
as
en
indigenous
riesgo
peoples.
su
We
vida,
face a constant threat of
la
violence,
integridad de la
and
familia.
this violence is expressed through different ways,
Entonces,
including
las
feminicide.
corporaciones, así como el
This is
gobierno
a
mexicano, siempre
continued
tienen
reality that we
pues
have to face.
grupos
People at the front lines
paramilitares,
in
así
social
como
movements
grupos
and
de choque
indigenous
dentro de
peoples,
la
we
misma,
know that we're putting ourselves at
dentro de las
risk, and
mismas
we
comunidades
understand
para
that
estar siempre a su
also extends to our
disposición.
families.
Sí, entonces, pues
So
las
we know
corporaciones,
that
así
part of the
como el
condition of
mismo
organizing in
gobierno,
this context is that
siempre van a tener
corporations and the
grupos
government
paramilitares, ¿no?
organizes
En las
paramilitary
diferentes
shock troops.
comunidades, como es el
We
caso
see this
quizá como
even
del levantamiento
with the uprisings led
en
by
el
the ZLN,
ZLN, que siempre tuvieron
the
también
Zapatista
grupos de
Army of
choque que
National
eran
Liberation
paramilitares
in
que
Chiapas,
amedrentaban a las
where
diferentes comunidades
the
que
need
estaban
existed to
levantando
organize
también
themselves in
como la
defense
voz
of the
en
shock
pro de las
troops that the
comunidades
government
indígenas. Entonces,
would
eso es
use against
siempre
them.
en
But
todos los
all
proyectos
extractivist projects that are led either
extractivismo
by the
también
government
tienen grupos
or by
paramilitares, así
multinationals
como
include
dentro de
these
las mismas comunidades
paramilitary
tienen
shock
grupos
groups as one
de
of the key
choque, ¿no? Que
strategies to
siempre
control
ponen como
and
a la
to
mitad de
force
la
their projects
población
onto the
que
people and in
esté en
communities.
contra de la
But
gente que
there's
esté en contra de
also
sus
a division
intereses.
created in communities where an effort is made to divide the community and make sure that there's half of the community that is in favor of the development project, or it would seem like they're in favor, and half that may oppose it. But this is being led as a ruse to what is really going on with the threats of violence and other manipulations of public processes.
Sí, y aquí
So I'd like to give an
quisiera
example
poner un
of a pueblo that's
ejemplo
about
que
5
está
miles
pasando
from my
ahorita aquí
pueblo.
en una
And
comunidad
this is
muy
where the
cercana
mine that we're
de
talking
mi
about
pueblo que
is
está
planned to
como
start. And
a
this
5
pueblo is a
millas o
historically
menos.
an indigenous
Es
community, but
es
it's been
la
divided by
comunidad
the
donde ya entró
mining
la
company.
mina y es
And
donde
one of the
quieren
ways that
empezar
divides the
con su proyecto
community
de
is basically
extracción
by
de
trying to
oro.
buy people out. And in this particular
Esta
case,
comunidad
they've
es una
donated
comunidad
computers to the
indígena
schools.
históricamente
They've fixed the
y
church.
lo
And
que
so
ha hecho la minera
this
es
in a
dividir a
way
la
indebts the
población, a la
community and
comunidad.
those people
¿De
that
qué
they're trying
forma?
to bring on to
La
support the
minera
mining
les
project
ha
against their
regalado,
best
primero
interest.
ha
Indebts the community, and it
buscado
also
diferentes formas
organizes a front
de
which
comprar a
then
la
is
población
used to punish
y
those people that are
algunas de las
opposing the
formas es
extractive
que está
industry project.
donando quizá
And so
computadoras
even within
a la
the community,
escuela
threats are made
y están
to the opponents of the
arreglando
extractive energy
la
and
iglesia de la
industry
comunidad.
projects, and they're
Entonces,
punished by
las
not
personas
allowing
que
them to
están
have water or basic
en
utilities.
contra del
And so these
proyecto de
deep
la minera
divisions are forced that we see
son
across
amenazados por las mismas
Mexico,
personas de la
and
comunidad.
that we've
Entonces les
seen
niegan
where
el
community
agua.
members
Las
have
autoridades
become so
siempre
divided
están
through this type of
a favor de la
externally
minera porque
imposed
la minera
violence
les ha
that
prometido
people have
muchas
had to
cosas,
actually
entre
leave
ellos
the pueblos
empleos
and
a
then
las
live in the
comunidades.
mountainsides.
Entonces es
So
otra
this
de
is
las
just
formas,
another
aparte
strategy that's
como del
implemented
uso
besides
del crimen
paramilitaries,
organizado,
is
otra de las
that
formas es
people are bought
comprar a la
out
población para
and
que
in
puedan
situations of
manifestarse a
extreme
favor de
poverty
sus
and
intereses, ¿no?
lack of basic material needs that perhaps the government should have provided anyways, in education or in civil infrastructure.
Sí.
Then the corporation buys people out.
Sí, y una
So
cosa
one
que
of the
quizás es
important things
importante
to
también mencionar
remember
aquí,
from
¿no?
the
Que la
United
diferencia
States
quizás
is
como en
that the
otros
key
países, como
difference
es el
in
caso
Mexico is
en
how
Estados
unequal
Unidos, que
wages are,
existe quizá un salario más
and that
equitativo, entre
these
comillas.
vast inequalities and
En
disparities
México
are
los salarios
exploited
son
by
muy
corporations, and in conditions of
desiguales, ¿no?
extreme
Entonces
poverty,
aquí una persona, más
people
bien
feel
las
indebted
corporaciones se
for any little
aprovechan de las
thing that may be
necesidades de
given
las.
to them.
So going back to the caravan and where it's traveling through Mexico, how much longer will this caravan be traveling? And we brought up Quintepec. Again, what is the destination point? And if there's anything else that you want to add in regards to why this destination point is so incredibly important due to all the things that you have been speaking to.
Muy bien. Bueno, la caravana
Well,
sí va a durar
the caravan
aproximadamente
is
un
going to
mes
last
y
approximately
va a
a
hacer un
month,
recorrido por
and it's going through
diferentes
different
estados de la
states from
República,
Puebla to
como es el
Tlaxcala,
caso de
Guerrero,
Puebla,
Veracruz,
Tlaxcala,
Oaxaca, and
Morelos,
Morelos.
Guerrero,
And its
Veracruz,
destination in
Querétaro y
Cointepec is
Oaxaca.
to
Y
address
el destino final va a ser
the planned
en la
extractive
comunidad de
industry of the
Cointepec,
mine And in particular, that mine is being imposed by Zacatecas Silver, which is a subsidiary of Alamos Gold. And since this project has not yet begun, and there's still an opportunity to stop it.
What type of minerals? Again, gold, it sounds like, but what else are they mining?
Muy bien, nada más en la pregunta anterior creo que me hicieron dos preguntas, ¿por qué es importante, no, en la comunidad de Cointepec? Y quisiera también...
Sí, quizás hay que mencionar el Xochicalco.
Sí, bueno, ahí sí quisiera como regresar a la pregunta. Pues Cointepec es una de las últimas comunidades donde la lengua, el náhuatl, le hablan los niños y los ancianos. Entonces, una de las concesiones del proyecto minera está en el territorio de la comunidad del pueblo y está muy cerca, como a 5 millas aproximadamente, 9 kilómetros del pueblo. Entonces, primero sabemos que un proyecto minero a cielo abierto causa una destrucción total.
So I'd like to return to the other question about the importance of Cointepec. Cointepec is one of the last communities in all the state of Morelos where everybody intergenerationally, from the children on up to the elders, speak Nahuatl as their first maternal language. And this mine is proposed within 5 miles of our pueblo. We know that open mining of this sort destroys the earth, destroys the environment and the landscape. It exploits the water due to the amount of water that's used to be able to mine the gold, and it harms the environment, creating scientific damages that have been proven scientifically that expose children to harmful particulates that are in the air. We're also concerned about the impact on the archaeological zone that exists, that is in the entire region, which is a very famous archaeological zone known as Xochicalco. And so we're concerned that this mining will damage that as well.
The caravan ending in Cointepec, the community of Morelos in South Mexico, or south of Mexico City. What activities are planned there to commemorate that arrival?
Sí, lo primero que va a ocurrir es el recibimiento por parte de la comunidad a toda la asamblea, a toda la caravana que va a llegar aquí a la comunidad. Son diferentes pues grupos, organizaciones, pueblos. Y van a haber diferentes talleres, principalmente talleres de información.
So, well, first of all, when the caravan arrives, we'll have important ceremonial welcoming protocols to receive the various organizations and indigenous representatives that are arriving in our pueblo. But then we're also going to organize workshops to learn about the impacts of open pit mining and also to learn about international and national laws that we can use to protect ourselves.
What organizations are going to be there? Are there politicians or local government that's going to be there?
Sí, sobre todo líderes políticos como tal, ¿no? Porque sabemos que casi siempre los proyectos grandes en México siempre están asociados también con los políticos. Entonces,
we'll be receiving leaders from across the states that are participating in the caravana. Not so much politicians, because we know that when it comes to big projects like this, politicians usually are defending or siding on the side of the corporations. But these are mostly autonomous organizations, and in particular, pueblos, direct representation of indigenous pueblos, and their representatives are going to address the issues that they're facing each in their own respective rights in their own pueblos or regions. And importantly, the convocation for the caravan is being called for by the National Indigenous Congress and their leadership. And so this carries a national indigenous representation as well.
What do you wish to achieve, to accomplish with the caravan? And then also, what can the communities do in order to provide support?
Sí, lo primero que se pretende hacer es la visibilización de esta problemática ante la sociedad. Y no solamente la sociedad como dentro de la comunidad, porque nosotros sabemos, ¿no? Sino más bien la sociedad también que está afuera, principalmente como...
So the most important thing is that we need to visibilize these issues and to visibilize the constant conflict that's created by these issues with the general society, the national society, and the international civil society. Many act as if we don't exist as indigenous peoples and as if these issues that we're facing don't exist. So it's important for us to know that we exist and for us to weave together networks networks among ourselves on a national level, on regional levels, and between our communities so that we can together pressure national and international entities to stop these projects of death.
There are multiple mega projects, as you've mentioned, that are a concern to the Caravan. One of those being proposed is this interoceanic corridor that would connect the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean by a rail line between two ports in the states of Oaxaca and Veracruz. Can you tell us how this will impact the indigenous people? Tell us about this project. What is the problem here?
Sí, yo creo que esta pregunta es un poco similar al problema que está sucediendo con el Tren Maya. Y uno de los principales problemas de todos estos proyectos carreteros es primero, pues el principal afectado es el medio ambiente, ¿no? La separación de los hábitats de los animales, la tala desmedida de los árboles, así como la contaminación y destrucción.
So this is a project that's very similar to the crisis caused by the Tren Maya, the Maya train tracks that are being proposed in the south. And the problems are not only the obvious impacts on the environment, on animals, on rivers, on ecosystems, and on the divisions that roads like these create. But besides those obvious impacts, there's also impacts on indigenous peoples, on the pueblos themselves. So these projects occur without support for language and culture in the pueblos. And so we see these as projects that are roads towards the capitalist deculturalization and de-indigenization of indigenous peoples, so that indigenous peoples then are forced to enter into the dominant society's culture and language and economy in a way that is unsupported and removes the foundations of their culture from their way of life.
We've been talking about the mega projects, corporate mega projects that have been happening, that are or proposed to be happening in Mexico, as well as this caravan that is traveling through different states of Mexico to bring awareness of the environmental and human health impacts and what's happening with the indigenous communities. Another mega project is the Integral Project of Morelos, consisting of 2 thermoelectric plants, as well as a gas and water pipeline that will dispossess the Nahua indigenous peoples in central Mexico. Can you tell us about these developments?
Sí, bueno, la termoeléctrica es parte de un proyecto integral aquí en el estado de Morelos que se inició en el 2006 aproximadamente en la administración de un exgobernador llamado Marco Adame y en el sexenio del expresidente Felipe Calderón. Y de acuerdo a una ficha técnica que se dio a conocer en ese momento, el proyecto incluye 2 centrales eléctricas de ciclo combinado.
This project presents the same crisis that other projects present in our communities and in our territories. This adds a significant risk of exposure to harmful effects in indigenous communities. The thermoelectric project is part of a statewide integration of the geothermal and thermoelectric generation of power that was approved by a previous administration, the ex-governor Marco Adame Castillo, and ex-president of Mexico, Felipe Calderón. And this is part of a mega plan that was created that gave light to this project. This project presents serious health concerns that have been protested and raised alarm since 2006, since this project first was implemented, and in particular of the communities that live near where the energy is being extracted. This is something that impacts not only the state of Morelos, but actually crosses into 3 other states, including Tlaxcala and Puebla. And so the ongoing concern that exists is that communities have risen and opposed the project and yet remain invisibilized. And the opposition continues to draw on the negative attention of the government and attacks against the peoples who are opposing this form of extractive energy.
Sí, y también quisiera como enfatizar un poquito aquí sobre quizá muchas veces las personas que escuchan allá dicen, pues es que pues es parte como de un desarrollo, ¿no? Dentro de la comunidad, pero realmente, en primer lugar, las comunidades
So one of the other biggest problems with these types of developments is that the energy that is extracted here is not for our communities, it's not for the people, it's for the corporations. And this is not, so people might think in the United States, might think, well, this is just progressive development. This is how you improve society. But this is not something that benefits our communities. This is something that is always extractive and is never for the community. And communities were never at the table to decide whether they wanted these types of extractive energy projects in their backyard.
You mentioned the human environmental health impacts from the land exploitation and the chemical use. What are those impacts that you're seeing when it comes to human health?
Bueno, existe en todo tiempo diferentes tipos de afectaciones, ¿no? La contaminación de los ríos, la contaminación de los mantos acuíferos.
So some of the impacts that we see in the environment that impact human health come from the contamination of rivers and the water table, the contamination of our territories, our forests, the jungles. In Morelos, we know that there's a very rich ecosystem of rivers, but these become contaminated. Part of this pollution comes from the cities that are formed in this context as they grow without any serious planning or consideration of the impact on other peoples around the big cities. That waste from the cities and from these mega projects comes directly into the rivers and is deposited in the rivers. These problems will continue to be multiplied as these extractive projects develop and will continue to impact the water table in general. But what we've also seen is as in examples in Guerrero, where mega projects are taking place, people are facing increasing rates of lung and skin cancer and other types of complications in prenatal health.
Marcos, what has been the Indigenous Peoples' response to climate change conference at COP 2021?
Well, I think we know that there have been many responses, and I think that's really important to note that there's such a diversity of voices and opinions that are rising to the level of international discourse that are guiding, I think, in the best way possible, international thinking and even the work of non-Indigenous peoples. The most clearly resounding call to action is that if we're serious about dealing with climate change and climate crisis that is impending, then we have to deal with the causes. And the most single clearest statement as to the causes is that colonization caused the climate crisis. And understanding that is important in contextualizing the impact of these mega projects in Mexico, or the impact of mega projects here in the United States or in Canada or anywhere in the world. And as they result in an impact on the territories of Indigenous peoples, some of which are still caretakers of the most pristine and the healthiest environments that are left in the ecosystem of the earth, then we have to recognize that we can't continue to allow that colonial project to continue. We can't allow it for its expansion. We can't allow it to continue to make the same mistakes that we know were created over the last 200 years, even the last 20 years. And yet we continue to see that. But we're not only talking about the remote zones that may be in some somewhat pristine area, but even off the coast of Los Angeles. You know, my students are studying the impacts of the fact that the U.S. Navy controls San Nicolas Island as a bombing range. I mean, San Nicolas Island is as far away from L.A. as Riverside is. And yet we have no awareness in Los Angeles about the impact of that military mega project that continues to enforce the economic mega projects that continue throughout the hemisphere.
And who is the National Indigenous Congress, and what has their involvement been?
The National Indigenous Congress was formed in 1996 under the call to action of the Zapatista Army of National Liberation to unite as indigenous peoples or as original peoples, following the San Andres agreements that were struck in between the government and the national government and the EZETA in Chiapas. Today, it still continues to have representation of the 68 languages that are recognized in Mexico, which are commonly referred to as pueblos, and the representation in this case, in the National Congress of Indigenous Peoples, is autonomous. It's not associated with the government, so it's not an official function of the Mexican state. It's an independent, autonomously functioning entity that is representative of our pueblos, and in a way also elevating the importance of the sovereignty and self-determination of our peoples as nations. And so then we consider this fact that not only is it a representative of the 68 languages, but of the many, many communities that are each autonomous and sovereign nations, so that we can together pressure for the federal government to follow the San Andres agreements from 1996, which have yet to be seen fully implemented.
Thank you. We're going to take a break real quick and be right back. Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying Eco Justice Radio. We air every Monday at 9 a.m. on KPFT Houston and every Wednesday at 3 p.m. on KPFK Los Angeles. Stay connected by subscribing to Eco Justice Radio on all major podcast apps and visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, to check out previous shows and guests and get connected with us on social media. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon. Today, you are listening to Indigenous Peoples of Mexico Unite Against Corporate Mega Projects, with host Jessica Aldrich, myself, and guest Victorino Torres Nava, professor of the Nahuatl language at the Anahualcomequec Academy, and Marcos Aguilar, head of the School of Anahualcomequec Academy and executive director of Semillas de Pueblo. Marcos, thank you so much for providing translation today. I want to bring you into the conversation here and talk about what you're doing at the school that you head. It's the only Indigenous school in Los Angeles County, California. Tell us about that school.
Anahualcomequec was founded in 2002 by a group of teachers and parents and students. And as a part of that original founding of the school, we sought for and received the blessing from Chief Yaana Vera Rocha of the Gabrielino Shoshone tribe of Southern California. And at that time, she had guided us for, well over a decade in different kinds of environmental land defenses and defense of burial sites and a defense of indigenous peoples in general as young people here in Los Angeles learning our way. But as indigenous Mexicans, we sought to organize a space that we could gather all indigenous peoples, that we could gather a curriculum and education that would benefit American Indians and indigenous peoples that are here from Mexico and Latin America as well. And to do so in a way that was uplifting for children, because in the face of all of this crisis and in the face of the social injustices that we've felt nonstop since, the last few decades, that we knew that understanding that education is an important part of our self-determination, we also recognized that childhood was an important right of our community. And so protecting childhood in a way that advanced the development of their education was extremely important to us. And there was no way to do that within the district. There's just simply no way, not at the level of the curriculum, not at the level of the administration, and not at the level of the teaching core. And so we sought to create an autonomous model, which we've done through Anahualcomequec International University of Preparatory of North America.
And how are the issues that we've been talking about today in Central America about climate change, other related topics, how are those addressed in the students' curriculum?
Well, we talk in education about what curriculum means. And in our school, we think about a fourth type of curriculum. Besides the written, besides the taught, and besides the assessed curriculum, we also have a living curriculum. And that living curriculum is what our students what their learning experience is really rooted in. And so understanding that our families are in the United States because we are also political exiles, because we are also climate refugees, because we are also forced into a situation of migration and immigration into the United States due to policies that are carried out by foreign companies in our homelands, then we recognize that our students have to learn both about what's happening here in the local environment as much as they have to learn about what's happening in homelands, whether that's in El Salvador, in Guatemala, or in Mexico, or in particular communities of origin. And we know that our families oftentimes keep these as closely held secrets almost, because these are painful truths. You don't necessarily raise your children to know that you're a climate refugee or to know that you're here because your parents are in political exile. that isn't necessarily how you want to raise your children. And so learning about these social realities and how to organize for the community to be able to collectively find solutions is something that's both healing and it's transformative, because we then know that as our children grow and as our students grow into their own acts of agency, that they not only are conscious of the challenges that their families may be facing, but that they're also there as leaders at the table to be able to propose solutions. And this is what we seek out of the curriculum. And we do this in many ways.
You made a comment to me previous to the show where you said science is ceremony. What do you mean by that?
Well, we're hoping to capture the idea that I guess the opposite idea, and that is that science without ceremony is harmful. That science without ceremony is poison. It's part of the problem. And so when we call for the development of our programs to recognize that science is ceremony, we're really speaking to ourselves in a way and reminding ourselves that without proper protocols, without proper respect and of the reciprocity that we have to have as human beings with our environment and with our relatives in our ecosystem, and the ecosystem that we share with them, that we're alive because of them, then can it truly be science? If science isn't ceremony, it really is something else, because just knowing the facts and figures to something doesn't, if you just know the facts and figures of the dimensions of the tires and of a steering wheel and of the amount of oil that goes into an engine, that doesn't teach you how to drive. But in order for you to know how to actually move that vehicle forward, you have to have a little bit more of a connection to the mechanics of and visualize what that experience would look like, and understand that you'll run out of gas if you don't put any in. So understanding that science is ceremony means that we have responsibilities, that we have a responsibility to reciprocity that provides a deeper root to the knowledge that we claim to hold.
We've been talking about the Water and Life Caravan and where it's going, what's happening in Mexico. What can people in the United States do to provide support?
Well, one of the things that is clear is that we have to understand that these issues are taking place, that we look for the media and that we look for the messages that are coming from Mexico. It's not that people are not speaking about it or are not acting on it, but we have to question why that news is filtered out. Why is it that the first 5 stories have nothing to do with this continent, and the 6th story is usually about somebody getting murdered? But there's really nothing that headlines the relevant environmental issues that are being faced by Indigenous peoples in this continent. And so we have to ask for that kind of media and demand that kind of media coverage in the media sources that we have. But I think the second thing is to respond to the fact that there is a call to action for policy that protects the rights and recognizes the rights of sovereign Indigenous peoples across the hemisphere. In this particular case, knowing that policy in California impacts policy in Mexico, and that the economics of our choices here in the United States impact the economics of Indigenous peoples in more ways than one. So not only is it an issue of a consumer approach to understanding the economic scale of the damage, but also understanding that there has to be a recognition that the life choices that we're making are harmful. Towards Victorino's point earlier, we're convinced that we can't drink the water from the tap because it's unhealthy. And perhaps it is unhealthy, but it isn't just because it's coming from the tap. We can't be convinced to think that bottled water is the only healthy way to drink water. And so when we should be thinking about how we create sustainability in our city and how we share that sustainability across the water sources that this water is drawn from in LA. I mean, we have to wonder sometimes with our students as we collected acorns for the first time this year since the pandemic, if we were to survive on acorns in the region of Southern California, which is what our ancestors and Indigenous ancestors here did, besides other food sources, but there was a limit to how much we could survive with just on acorns. What would Los Angeles be like today? We have to question why that the concentration of labor is organized as such in this city. I think in particular, supporting the Caravan also means an economic support. And so to the extent that people in the United States can provide this type of social and economic support for the mobilization of Indigenous peoples elsewhere, it's important to think beyond the cost of just the banners or beyond the cost of just the supplies for the workshops and the convenings in the pueblos, but perhaps there's also a cost to becoming a political exile. And so it's good to see that as we recognize political exiles from across the ocean, that when we see political exiles at the border from our own hemisphere, from across the fence, that we have to be able to provide that type of sanctuary in our cities, in the country, and recognize that there has to be that freedom of movement in order for freedom of expression to truly exist anywhere.
Where do people get more information on the Water and Life Caravan and what's happening?
We're sharing the information for this particular stage on our website, and we'll be posting updates there from Victorinos, Pueblo, and Cuentepec, and as well as a donation link that people can provide some funding for, specifically to support the convening in the Pueblo of Cuentepec, Morelos. So anybody wanting to learn more about the Caravan and its last few days and about the outcomes and about how to support the economics of gathering people in Cuentepec can go to www.dignidad.org, dignidad.org, which is dignity in Spanish.
Marcos, for those that want to know more about the school, where do they find your school? Where do they find more information?
Anahuacalmecac's webpage is www.dignidad.org. We also have an Instagram account, which is our school's name, at Anahuacalmecac, and we try to keep that up posted with student activities, community events, and community actions that we're participating and supporting.
Great. And listeners, if you go to Eco Justice Radio for the post of this show, we'll have everything linked. So you'll be able to either go in the bio, or we'll have the Instagram page and the social media pages linked to our post as well. So make it easy for you to find them. Marcos or Victorino, is there books or writings or people that you would want to recommend that our listeners check out?
In order to learn more about the Caravan and social struggles led by Indigenous peoples in Mexico, I recommend that you go to congresonacionalindígena.org. And as a recommendation for reading, I think one of the books that's been most impactful with our students is Braiding Sweetgrass. Braiding Sweetgrass has been an important book that raises an Indigenous perspective regarding Indigenous wisdom, scientific knowledge, and the teaching of plants.
Who's that by?
Robin Wall Kimmer.
Great. We'll make sure to include that on our list as part of our Patreon. Are there any other projects that you want to mention? I just want to make sure that you'll have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Anahuacalmecac students and community members are re-engaging in important ways in what we're calling land-back learning. And part of that is with an expansion of support for Indigenous language learning. And so we're just launching now a youth-led project regarding language rights, Indigenous language rights across the county. Secondly, we've launched a project with several partners, including the Tataviam Nation and the Gabrielino Shoshone Tribal Council, California Native Vote Project, to help support American Indian high school students go to college. And this is called Native Ways to College. We have a campaign in LA Unified School District to call attention to the rights of Indigenous students. And we've launched a Indigenous Education Now campaign to proclaim those rights. And we've secured $10 million of funding from the district to benefit the students. But that's been stuck for almost a year and a half now in bureaucracy, and not a cent of it has gotten to our students. And this is supposed to have been pandemic relief funding that still has not been spent. Lastly, we have a native reforestation project, which our students are leading in the local Otsugna territories of Debs Park in partnership with several other partners. And interestingly enough, one of the biggest challenges we're facing right now is that city officials in the Parks Department, although working with us, are wanting to make us responsible for the cost of the water to water native plants as we're reforesting with our kids. And so our biggest call to action with them, given that we've had several deaths and unfortunately community members bodies have been found in Debs Park over the years, including 2 young Indigenous girls. So our call to action is that we need our Indigenous youth in the mountains doing positive things, not finding Indigenous bodies left behind. So we need whatever support we need from the city to engage in positive actions of reforestation and regeneration.
And if people that are listening are like, yes, I want to help you. Is there signatures? Is there voices at city council? Would they just go to your social media pages and your website to try to see how that they might be able to provide?
They'll be hearing more about all of this in our social media pages.
Perfect. That's great. Well, thank you both for being on the show today. This has been It's been a wonderful show, and I have absolutely loved having both of you here today. Thank you, Marcos, for providing translation and for the work that both of you are doing.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Thank you to Jack and SoCal 350.
Sí, solamente pues recordar, ¿no? Que todos venimos de la tierra y todos compartimos el aire, todos compartimos el agua. Entonces, aparte de invitarlos a que puedan apoyar de diferentes formas, quizá como...
Well, thank you very much. Well, I'd like to remember that we are all people of the earth. We all drink water. We all need to breathe the air. And besides supporting by carrying out joint actions wherever you are, that we all need to also remember that we share this earth as a people and as a humanity.
Gracias.
Gracias, Victorino. Thank you to our guest, Victorino Torres Nava, professor of the Nahuatl language at the Anahualcametcac Academy, and Marcos Aguilar, head of the School of Anahualcametcac Academy and executive director of Semillas del Pueblo. And thank you to our listeners for joining us. This has been Indigenous Peoples of Mexico Unite Against Corporate Mega Projects. For an extended version of this interview, become a member of our Patreon. Please connect with us on social media at EcoJustice Radio, SoCal 350, and Adventures in Waste. If you like what you heard and you want others to be informed, you know what to do. Subscribe to our podcast, share the episodes, get that information out there, and help us continue our efforts by joining our Patreon and making a donation to the show. A project of SoCal 350, the show can be found on kpfk.org, kpft.org, all major podcast apps, and at ecojusticeradio.org. Created by Mark and JP Morris, executive producer Jack Ite, producer and co-host Jessica Aldridge, co-host Carrie Kim, and engineer and original music by Blake Quake Beats. And until next time, remember, the power is yours.